Hey ladies, today's Genesis chapter 11. I read it a few times and there were a few things that I gathered from it that I really enjoyed. I actually took comfort in it and I'll tell you why. So, in Genesis chapter 9, God told Noah and his family that they needed to spread out and multiply and replenish the earth. And then in Genesis chapter 11, his family was traveling east, so it looks like they were obeying and they were replenishing the earth. But then they came across a valley and they decided to stop and build a tower. And the reason that they gave for building the tower was that they wanted to make a name for themselves and that they didn't want to be spread out over the earth. So we can see here that pride stepped in because of them wanting to make a name, and that their own desire for their life stepped in, that they didn't want to spread out anymore. They wanted to stick together. So I know that we can all relate to that, where pride steps in and we want to do things our way and not God's way. And I'll get to that in a moment. Now, it was cool, I thought, that they talked about how they were going to make the brick and they were going to heat it up with fire, and so I enjoyed that part. And then also, it says that God came down and looked at the tower that they were building. And so if you're teaching a young child, one of the things that you could teach them is, where's God? And then you say, up, because God came down, right? So that's a fun one. My mom used to teach us that when we were children. But then continuing on, so these people were obeying, and then pride stepped in and whatnot. And I found it very comforting for myself, because I know that so often I start out obeying God and then my pride steps in and I stop obeying because of it. And a lot of times I don't even realize that I've stopped obeying the Lord until He has to point it out to me. And that's kind of what He did with them, was He came down and He decided to confuse their language and make them spread out. And the wonderful part about that is that even when we mistakenly or on purpose choose to disobey God and His commandments, God is going to make sure that His will is being done here, even if we're not following His will. And so I was comforted by that, because there's so many times where I know that I personally mess up and make mistakes. And then I think to myself, oh God, I'm so sorry. I don't want to keep your will from being done. But no matter what, God's already factored in my humanity and my sinful nature, and His will be done. So you can take comfort in that. Also, in Genesis chapter 11, halfway through, it starts out with the lineage of Shem and the age in which he had children, and then his children had children, and so on. Now, back in Genesis 5, I think, it does the same thing. And I personally have added up the ages of these men and then and factored in the age in which they had children, and so on, to add up how old the earth was, starting with Adam as the beginning, up until the flood. And so that was fun. And so at this point in Genesis chapter 11, if you've done that already, or you go back and do it, you can continue into lineage and add in the ages of those men. And if you follow through the Bible, you'll eventually be able to do the entire, there's my son, you'll eventually be able to do the entire lineage and ages all the way up to Jesus. So that's fun too. Anyways, I hope y'all have a blessed day, and I hope you enjoyed Genesis chapter 11.